Hi, my name is Chris Pittman. I'm a sales engineering manager here at BlackBerry. I have a background in network and digital forensics that I teach at a couple universities here in Michigan. And I've been on the security operations and the security consulting and services side for about the last 15 years. What I want to talk to today is this idea of zero trust and provide sort of a rational approach to implementing zero trust within our organizations. Obviously, zero trust is not a product that we buy. It's a security philosophy or a framework or an approach to the way that we do security within our organizations. And I want to begin, right, by looking back at how Forrester defined zero trust about 10 years ago, but also understand that this is still evolving, and we've actually put a lot of structure around zero trust in the last 2 years, more so than the 8 or 9 years before that. But let's understand that it's largely our environment that got us here, because our users are increasingly, or maybe even ubiquitously, mobile. Our users are accessing their compute resources on the go, wherever they may be on the globe, right? And they're accessing those resources from multiple devices, not just a phone, not just a laptop, not just a desktop, but multiple devices, sometimes all at the same time. I mean, I definitely know of times that I'm using my laptop and I'm using my mobile phone as well to perform some kind of productivity activity, connecting to different networks or connecting to different applications and resources. Those data that I use, the application and services that I'm accessing, those are in distributed data centers around the world. Our company data may be, even if we have one cloud provider, it may be distributed across multiple physical data centers. We certainly have company data that's located locally as well as in the cloud, right? And our applications may be accessed from anywhere in the world from multiple cloud providers or application services. So this is the environment, the compute environment that we find ourselves in, that really necessitated the evolution to a zero trust model. And then there's the threats involved in the way that we do computing now, right? All of these networks are assumed hostile. We no longer assume that we can establish a network perimeter and everything on this side of that perimeter is safe. We can no longer assume that even with our cloud providers, that if we establish an edge or even establish privileges and policies around the resources in that cloud, that the resources beyond that edge or beyond those policies are safe, because there are hostile forces or hostile actors on each side of any perimeter. Threats exist both internally and externally. And I don't need to show the statistics around this, but any Verizon data breach report will show us that the inside user is increasingly the greatest threat in any particular network, resource, or scenario. So we have an environment that is defined by threats. And we have an environment that is increasingly mobile, and we have users that are accessing all of our resources, including our data and application, from multiple devices, from multiple locations geographically. This is the scenario that we have to secure, and this is what zero trust was born to do. Underlying all of this, I think, is this principle that I say almost every time I talk. We need to see trust as a vulnerability. And I want this to come across as tangibly as if trust was listed on your company's risk register, and anywhere that trust was enacted, anywhere that trust existed between two things or two people, we saw that as a vulnerability that we had to assign a score to, and we had to either accept or mitigate or remediate that threat. I want us to see trust in that kind of a threat manner, because that will allow us to shift into a zero trust thinking when it comes to applying rationally zero trust frameworks to our security policies, technologies, and people. So I want to talk about 3 working principles for zero trust today. And I don't think these are necessarily new, but out of all of the content out there on zero trust, I want to zero in on these 3 and then see how we can apply these to some specific areas within our security practice. Number 1, let's understand or believe or come to see trust as people-centric. So I don't want us to see trust as security policies between devices or security perimeters on a network. I want us to see trust as people-centric. At the center of our security program is the necessity of keeping people secure, because at the center of every transaction is a person. It is a person who is interacting with a network on a device to access data within an application, right? The person, the people, are at the center of those transactions. So trust fundamentally is people-centric. So we need to manage that trust We need to assign that trust. We need to deal with the risk of that trust where people are concerned. That's number one. Number two is this, that trust is never assumed. It doesn't matter how secure our endpoint is, or how strong our perimeter around a data center is, or how well designed a particular application may be. Trust is never assumed on the part of anything, any object, and certainly not within any transaction. We can never assume trust. Now, you and I may agree to this sort of philosophically or logically right now, but then when we go back to actually looking at how our security programs work in our organizations, we will see that there are plenty of places where we assume something is trust, where we assume a device, a person, a thing, an app, or some object is trusted, and we don't think about the necessity of adding security controls to it. Let's get this into our head that trust can never be assumed, and then let's understand this third one, that trust is dynamic. So trust is not something we turn on or off. It's not yes or no. It exists on a spectrum, and it needs to move back and forth depending on the context of any particular situation. So I may trust Bill when he is in the office on this device accessing this application from this data store, but I do not necessarily trust Bill as much when he's accessing those same resources from a home network or from a coffee shop. So the trust that I do or have for Bill in that given situation is dynamic. It changes based on the context of that situation. And of course, you've probably heard plenty by now that context is one of the fundamental principles of zero trust. We have to understand the context of transactions in order to begin to approach a zero trust security framework. So knowing those three things, that trust, people are at the center of trust, that trust can never be assumed, and that trust is dynamic, let's apply those three principles or ideas to these three areas of security within our organizational practice. Number one, let's talk about device security. So in the past, device security was at the heart of some of our security programs, right? We had to have a local firewall. We had to have some kind of data loss prevention. We probably had some kind of a data encryption, and we certainly had anti-malware. And now, of course, we have some kind of EDR relating to our endpoint devices. But let's move beyond just seeing the necessity of securing or hardening those devices, and let's talk about how we apply zero trust philosophies to implementing zero trust security within our device security platforms. Number one, let's understand that, first of all, we need to embrace all devices. And when I say all devices, I don't just mean laptops and desktops plus mobile or plus phones or plus smart devices. What I mean by this increasingly is that exploding world of IoT. All of those things that now have operating systems and now connect to a network that my users, those people, somehow interact with. Now, they may not directly open a session to that particular connected device, or they may not directly store data on an IoT device, but there are interactions between those people and those devices in the course of work, or between those devices and my network, or between those devices and various applications that ingest or digest data, right? There are interactions between all of those different IoT devices. So I need to, from a security organization, embrace all of the devices and understand that my responsibilities as a security operations team is to provide a security program for all of the endpoint devices within my organization, not just Windows, Mac, and Linux, and not just desktop, laptop, mobile, right? Everything. We need to expand our horizons when it comes to managing endpoints and understand that endpoint means more than just those traditional compute devices. In order to manage anything, what do I need? I obviously have to have visibility. I need a platform. I need a device. I need a console. I need some mechanism to get visibility into any of those devices that are interacting with my people, my network, my applications, and my data. Now, there are some emerging network operation and network security technologies that are allowing me to see increasingly all of these devices in one place so that I can begin to secure them. But increasingly, it will be a collaboration between network and endpoint and data and cloud providers that will need to converge in order for me to have comprehensive visibility into everything that my people, who are at the center of my zero trust, are interacting with in some fashion. And then I need to find a way find a vendor, find a technology, find a platform, or build, work toward this, because it's probably not going to happen overnight. It will not happen overnight. I need to have a mechanism that allows me to translate my security program policies into actual device, people, data, cloud policies within each of these environments. I need to have a platform that allows me to implement common policies, regardless of what the device is, regardless of what the operating system is, regardless of where the network is, right? I need to stop seeing these artificial distinctions between local network, cloud network, traditional compute device, laptop, mobile compute device. If it is a device, if it is a network, if it's an application, there need not be any of those segmentations or silos. I need to be able to implement common policies. Only when I get to this place of simplified common policies within my security program will I really be at a place where I can embrace a zero trust model. Number two, let's talk about the fact that those security policies that I'm talking about need to, by definition, remember from before, they need to be dynamic. And by dynamic policies, what I'm talking about is that we're no longer establishing user rights or file rights or firewall rights, whitelist, blacklist, at the point of origin, and then setting it and forgetting it. My policies need to be based on a transactional security model where I'm examining everything that attempts to happen from a user on a device trying to access an application on this network to use this data. There's 5 or 6 different variables there that all represents a transaction. I need to evaluate that transaction on the basis of 2 things. The context of that transaction, so who is the user? Where are they physically? What is the device they're using right now? What is the application they're trying to use? Where is that application hosted? What is the data involved in this transaction, right? What is the context of this transaction? And then what is the intent, right? This takes time. Intent is something that can be measured as part of that overall umbrella of UEBA. I need to establish a profile for that user. I need to establish profiles for that application and those data for my company network as a whole, right? What is the norm so that I can then begin to predict intents or have baselines of intents or profiles of intents and then identify anomalies to those, right? So this is where I need to get where my security policy is concerned. It needs to be transactional, taking into account the context of a transaction and also the intent of that transaction in order to allow it or disallow it at the point of transaction. Not at the point of establishing a session or a connection, but at the point of transaction, am I going to allow that to occur? Number 3, let's understand how we apply this to identity as a whole, because our identity management, our identity security program will need to shift and evolve within a zero trust framework. Number 1, there's the need to understand that we do not just authenticate once, even if our initial identity and authentication mechanism is fantastic, even if it's multi-factor with biometric, even if we are absolutely certain right at that point of authentication that we trust that person and we allow that connection, that's fine, but that is no longer adequate because we need to have continuous authentication. Is that user who authenticated this session or on that device an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours ago, is it the same person? Has their behavior or their risk profile changed since they originally authenticated? And this is where these 2 ideas of confidence and risk scoring come into play. This is another application for artificial intelligence because I need to have establishing a confidence score in the user's identity. How sure am I that Bill is who Bill says he is, that it is Bill behind that keyboard or holding that device or attempting this transaction? That is a confidence score I have based on Bill's behavioral profile, how he interacts with his device, his applications, where he is physically or geographically. All of that will establish a confidence score that will be dynamic, move up and down. And if it moves low enough, I will then force maybe a re-authentication, or I will begin to diminish his rights and his access, right? On the other side of that though, not only do I need to ascertain my confidence score in the user, but what is the risk associated with that user and that transaction? Both of these things together, the confidence in the user's identity and the risk associated with that, what that identity is attempting to do, can feed into the transaction decision that is made in real time at machine speed. Obviously, AI is going to be the only thing that's appropriate to make those kinds of determinations at machine speed. And I think fundamentally, one of the ideas or the notions that we need to get into our mind is this idea of zero standing privilege. There's really no need, there's really no case to be made for offering a particular user a certain set of admin or even elevated privileges for the course of their entire session. Every user, every object, everything should come into our network with a zero standing privilege that can and should only be elevated for the purpose of a transaction, and then it should be reduced back to the lowest possible privilege for that particular network, for that particular transaction, for that particular situation. So if we think about these three concepts for each of these three areas, we really find ourselves well down the road to rational zero trust application within our organization. This is a mindset shift between what our old security operational model was, between signatures and whitelists and blacklists and using threat feeds and a bunch of if-then rules, to AI-enabled security operations where we have continuous authentication, contextual access, using transactional level security with dynamic adaptive security policy. This is at the core of what a modern zero trust security program will look like, what you see on your screen right here. And the center of this is that huge mindset shift that comes from everything I've discussed previous to this. Now at BlackBerry, we apply this in our technology and our platform and in our stack in a number of different ways, but you can see those philosophies represented here in this graphic, in the circles, right? The center here is the data that our users and our people, our applications, our networks, and our devices are attempting to get. And then we have the dynamic adaptation that determines whether or not those things will be allowed, the continuous and contextual authentication that feeds into those transactional security decisions. And on the outside of that are all of the data points that feed into those transactional security decisions. I need to be able to monitor and perform risk-based decisions. Only AI can do that on a moment-to-moment basis in machine time. So that's what the BlackBerry Zero Trust architecture that we call Spark is all about. And however your vendor or your stack of vendors implement that, at the core of it will be the principles that we've discussed to this point, right? And that is really what we outline here at BlackBerry and some of our Zero Trust resources that you can access online at these two links. We're happy to talk to you at any point about how BlackBerry Spark can provide endpoint security, identity management, UEBA across your devices, your applications, your data, and your users. Thanks so much for your time today.